Tonight, we will tell you a story of ancient cunning, a tale woven from desperate hope and brilliant deception, a narrative of how the greatest fortress of its age was breached not by brute force, but by a masterful trick. This is the story of the Trojan Horse, a silent wooden shadow that brought an unyielding city to its knees, forever changing the course of a legendary war. You will discover why a decade of relentless battle proved futile, what ingenious mind conceived the audacious plan, how a simple wooden construct became the ultimate weapon, and what divine and human forces converged to seal Troy's tragic fate. It is a story not just of victory and defeat, but of human fallibility, of the thin line between trust and destruction, and of the enduring power of a single, brilliant lie. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and perhaps suggest new historical topics in the comments. New sleep stories arrive here every day. All right, find a comfortable spot, perhaps in your bed or on a soft couch. Take a deep, slow breath, letting your body sink gently into the warmth and stillness around you. Let any thoughts of the day drift away like clouds on a calm evening sky. Our story begins not with the horse itself, but with the weary years that preceded its creation, with a city that refused to fall, and an army on the brink of despair. For 10 long years, the Achaeans, or Greeks as we know them, had besieged the magnificent city of Troy. Their vast fleet, assembled from every corner of their lands, had brought thousands of warriors to the shores of Asia Minor, all driven by the oath to reclaim Helen, the beautiful Spartan queen abducted by the Trojan prince Paris. It had been a full decade since the great Achaean fleet, numbering over 1,000 ships, first cast anchor on the shores of the Troad, the land where the mighty city of Troy stood. 10 long years of relentless war, of countless battles fought beneath the scorching sun and the chilling stars, had passed. The initial fervor, the burning desire for vengeance that had driven the Greek heroes across the Aegean Sea, had slowly, inexorably, given way to a profound and heavy weariness, a weariness that settled deep in their bones. You can imagine the toll such a prolonged conflict would take on any army, no matter how valiant. The Achaean warriors, men who had left their homes, their families, and their fertile lands behind, now felt the weight of time pressing down upon them. Many had fallen, their lives extinguished on the dusty plains before the city walls or on the blood-soaked beaches. The names of heroes, once whispered with awe, were now often spoken with a sigh, a lament for those who would never return to their homelands, to Ithaca, to Mycenae, to Sparta. The camps, once bustling with the vibrant energy of fresh arrivals, now bore the marks of constant attrition. Tents were patched and weathered, armor was dented and dull, and the faces of the remaining soldiers were etched with the lines of endurance and suffering. The daily routine of battle, skirmishes, and the endless vigil had become a grinding monotony. Hope, which had once flared brightly with every minor victory, now flickered like a dying ember. The very air around the Achaean encampment seemed heavy with unspoken questions. How much longer could they endure? When would this ceaseless struggle finally end? The frustration was palpable, a bitter taste in the mouths of men who had sacrificed so much for a war that seemed to have no resolution. The very air hummed with unspoken despair. Their leaders, mighty kings and skilled strategists like Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae and the overall commander, and the cunning Odysseus, king of Ithaca, found themselves grappling with dwindling morale and the growing discontent of their troops. Even the most resolute among them began to doubt if Troy could ever truly be conquered by conventional means. For all their strength, their courage, and their formidable array of heroes, the Achaeans had found Troy to be an unyielding fortress. The city itself, known in ancient times as Ilion, was not merely a large settlement, it was a bastion of immense strength, protected by walls that seemed to defy all human efforts. These weren't just ordinary fortifications built by mortal hands. According to the ancient tales, the colossal walls of Troy had been constructed with the aid of the gods themselves. Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Apollo, the god of music, poetry, light, healing, and archery, had at one point been tasked with building these very ramparts for King Laomedon of Troy. Their divine craftsmanship had imbued the walls with an almost supernatural resilience, making them impervious to battering rams, siege towers, and the most determined assaults. Each stone whispered defiance. Every attempt to breach them had met with failure, repelled by the brave Trojan defenders and the sheer impregnability of their defenses. Within those walls, the Trojans, led by their wise King Priam and their valiant champion Prince Hector, had demonstrated an extraordinary resilience. They were fighting for their homes, their families, and the very survival of their city, and this made them formidable adversaries. Their morale, unlike that of the Achaeans, was sustained by the knowledge that they were defending sacred ground, and by a deep-seated belief in their city's divine protection. They had witnessed the retreat of the Achaean forces time and again, seen their siege engines crumble, and their bravest warriors fall. This only reinforced their conviction that Troy was invincible, a city favored by the gods, destined to stand forever. The years of siege had hardened them, turning them into seasoned defenders who knew every inch of their walls, every vantage point, and every weakness in the Achaean lines. The stalemate had become a grim reality. The Achaeans could not take Troy, and the Trojans could not drive the Achaeans away. It was a war of attrition, slowly bleeding both sides dry, but with no clear path to victory for either. The vast plains between the Achaean ships and the Trojan walls were scarred with the marks of 10 years of conflict. Burial mounds of the fallen, charred remains of siege equipment, and the faint, persistent smell of dust and dried blood. The air carried the distant cries of gulls, the mournful sound of the sea, and sometimes the faint, chilling echo of a Trojan war cry, reminding the Achaeans of the persistent enemy within the impregnable city. The very landscape seemed to sigh under the burden of so much unresolved strife. The strategic impasse was complete. All conventional military tactics had been exhausted. Direct assaults had failed, prolonged sieges had yielded nothing but mounting casualties, and attempts at negotiation had been fruitless. The Achaean leaders convened council after council, their voices growing hoarse with frustration, their minds racing to find a new approach. They knew that something had to change, that a different kind of strategy was needed if they were ever to break this seemingly endless deadlock. The traditional methods of warfare, reliant on brute force and numerical superiority, had proved insufficient against a city so divinely protected and so fiercely defended. It was clear that a new path, one that transcended mere strength, was required. A path that involved not just power, but cunning, not just courage, but ingenuity. The desperation of the situation was a fertile ground for radical ideas, for a departure from the established norms of warfare. It was in this atmosphere of weariness, frustration, and the urgent need for a decisive shift that the seeds of an extraordinary plan began to form in the mind of the most resourceful among them, a plan that would forever be etched into the annals of history, a testament to human wit in the face of insurmountable odds. The stage was set for a deception of unparalleled scale, one that would exploit not the physical weaknesses of Troy, but the very beliefs and hopes of its people. It was in this atmosphere of desperation that a singular mind, known for its extraordinary cunning and an intellect sharper than any blade, began to conceive a solution radically different from anything attempted before. This was Odysseus, the illustrious king of Ithaca, a man whose reputation for strategic brilliance and inventive thought preceded him, making him both revered and sometimes feared among his peers. Unlike other heroes who relied primarily on strength and courage in battle, Odysseus possessed a unique gift for persuasion, a deep understanding of human psychology, and an unparalleled capacity for intricate planning. He recognized that the direct confrontation, the very essence of their war for so long, had become futile. The physical might of the Achaean army, though immense, was simply insufficient to overcome the divine protection that seemed to shield Troy. Odysseus understood that to defeat Troy, they would need to outwit it, to penetrate its defenses not through force, but through deception. His mind, ever restless and seeking ingenious solutions, turned to the realm of divine intervention, not as a direct plea for aid, but as a tool for misdirection. The inspiration for his audacious plan, many believed, came directly from Athena, the revered goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts. Athena had always held a special regard for Odysseus, recognizing in him a kindred spirit of intellect and ingenuity. It was as if her divine insights, her profound understanding of both human and divine nature, were subtly guiding his thoughts, shaping the contours of an idea that no mortal had ever dared to conceive. She did not simply whisper the idea to him. Rather, she illuminated the path, revealing the vulnerabilities that lay hidden beneath the Trojans' unwavering piety and their justifiable pride in their city's resilience. The concept that began to solidify in Odysseus's mind was both audacious in its scope and terrifying in its potential consequences. He envisioned not another siege engine, nor a new weapon to hurl against the walls, but a seemingly innocuous offering, a colossal gift that would, in fact, conceal a deadly secret. His plan was to construct an immense wooden horse, a structure so grand and imposing that it would appear to be an impossible feat of engineering, and so magnificent that it could only be interpreted by the Trojans as a genuine, sacred tribute to the gods, specifically to Athena, whose favor the Achaeans ostensibly sought to appease after years of destructive warfare. This monumental horse would be meticulously designed and hollowed out, ingeniously crafted to hold a select group of the bravest and most formidable Greek warriors within its immense belly. The very notion was unprecedented, a stratagem that relied entirely on the enemy's deep-seated reverence for divine signs and their natural desire to claim a symbol of their hard-won victory. The essence of the plan was a profound act of feigned surrender. The Achaean fleet after a decade of blockade, would appear to abandon the siege entirely, sailing away from the Trojan shores, leaving behind only this massive, enigmatic wooden structure. The Trojans, upon discovering this colossal, seemingly abandoned gift, would be faced with a critical dilemma. Odysseus, with his keen understanding of human nature, gambled on their piety, their pride, and their inherent desire to interpret such a find as a clear sign of divine favor, a grand trophy marking their ultimate triumph over the Greeks. He foresaw that they would, in their celebratory zeal and their deep faith, bring the horse inside their city walls, believing it to be a tangible symbol of their deliverance and a final, desperate offering from the defeated Achaeans. Once this immense hollow effigy was safely within the protective confines of Troy, under the impenetrable cloak of night, the hidden warriors would emerge from its belly. Their mission would be precise and swift, to overpower the unsuspecting guards, open the massive city gates from within, and allow the secretly returning main Achaean army to pour into the heart of Troy, finally breaching its impregnable defenses not through direct military might, but through an unparalleled act of cunning and subterfuge. This was a gamble of immense proportions, a plan fraught with peril, demanding absolute secrecy, flawless execution, and an unwavering belief in the human propensity for misjudgment when confronted with what appeared to be an unequivocal sign of divine blessing. Odysseus presented his audacious scheme to the weary Achaean leaders, gathering them in a hushed council. Many among them, including the formidable Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae and commander-in-chief, were initially skeptical, questioning the feasibility and the sheer audacity of such a trick. The idea of abandoning their traditional warfare for such an elaborate ruse seemed almost cowardly to some. However, the sheer desperation of their decade-long situation, the undeniable failure of all conventional military options, coupled with Odysseus's compelling eloquence and the implicit, almost tangible blessing of Athena, gradually swayed even the most hesitant among them. There seemed to be no other viable path, no other flicker of hope for victory after a decade of relentless, soul-crushing struggle. This colossal wooden horse, a silent, hollow giant, would thus become their last, most desperate, and most cunning hope for finally bringing Troy to her knees, transforming the very nature of warfare from a clash of spears to a battle of wits and deception. The idea, born from the strategic mind of Odysseus, now required execution of an unprecedented scale. To bring this audacious vision to life, the Achaeans turned to Epeius, a renowned master craftsman whose skill in carpentry and construction was unmatched throughout the Hellenic world. Epeius, though not a warrior of the first rank, possessed an ingenuity that proved truly invaluable in this crucial moment. He was known for his ability to craft intricate and enormous structures, and this project would test the very limits of his craft. Under the vigilant eye of Odysseus, who oversaw every detail with meticulous precision, Epeius began the daunting task. The very concept of such a creation was audacious, a colossal wooden horse so immense that it would dwarf anything the Trojans had ever seen, yet crafted with such deceptive artistry that it might be mistaken for a genuine offering to the gods. The timber for this monumental undertaking was gathered from the sacred groves near Mount Ida, timber that had stood for centuries, now destined for a purpose that would reshape history. The sound of axes biting into wood, the rhythmic clang of hammers, and the rasp of saws filled the air of the Achaean camp. This was not a quick endeavor, it was a sustained effort, demanding patience and unwavering focus from every craftsman involved. The horse was designed to be hollow, a cavernous belly capable of concealing a formidable contingent of Achaean warriors. Achaeans crafted a system of hidden levers and internal mechanisms that would allow the warriors inside to emerge silently and swiftly when the time was right. The exterior, however, was sculpted with an almost religious reverence, a majestic representation of a horse complete with a flowing mane and a powerful arched neck. Its eyes, carved from dark wood, seemed to gaze with an unnerving lifelike quality. The surface was smoothed and polished, presenting an image of dedication and reverence. Every joint was precisely fitted, every plank secured with expert precision, ensuring not only its structural integrity, but also its seamless appearance. The construction site was a hive of activity, yet surrounded by an unusual silence from the rest of the camp. The Achaean soldiers, understanding the secrecy required, went about their daily routines with an air of anticipation, glancing occasionally at the growing silhouette of the wooden beast. The sheer scale of the project was a testament to the Achaeans' desperation and their willingness to embrace an unconventional path to victory. Odysseus himself spent countless hours at the site, consulting with Epeus, examining the internal structure and ensuring that every detail served the overarching goal. He checked the entry points, the means of egress, the ventilation for the hidden men, and the overall stability. The air inside the horse, once sealed, would be confined, and the men would need to endure hours, perhaps days, in cramped, dark conditions. This required careful planning for their sustenance and comfort as much as humanly possible during their hidden vigil. The horse slowly took shape, growing taller than the tallest man, wider than a chariot, a silent, imposing monument to Cunning. Its presence began to cast a long shadow over the Achaean camp, stretching towards the distant walls of Troy, a promise of what was to come. The wood, freshly cut, hardened under the relentless sun, becoming a vessel of deception and destiny. The work was arduous, requiring immense strength and strategic foresight. Epeus, guided by Odysseus's strategic insights, meticulously shaped each piece, understanding that any flaw, however minor, could lead to catastrophic failure. The weight of the timber, the complexity of the internal framework, and the need for absolute stealth in its operation made it an engineering marvel. They carved a small, discreet hatch on its side, a hidden door that would be the key to Troy's undoing. This hatch, designed to blend seamlessly, was undetectable from the outside. The Achaeans worked in secrecy, their movements deliberate, voices hushed, fearing any sound might carry to the ever-watchful Trojans. The construction was not simply an act of building, it was an act of faith, a gamble against the odds, a testament to the belief that ingenuity could triumph where brute force had failed. Every chisel stroke, every hammered peg brought them closer to their audacious objective. The scent of fresh-cut pine mingled with the salty tang of the sea, a peculiar blend that would forever be associated with this monumental undertaking. The artisans worked tirelessly, their hands calloused, their minds focused on the intricate details of their deceptive masterpiece. The horse was not just a structure, it was a symbol, destined to become synonymous with ultimate deception. Its massive form loomed over the camp, a silent wooden giant awaiting its moment to strike. Every nail, every plank, every carved detail was imbued with the desperate hope of the Achaean army. With the colossal wooden horse now standing complete, its hollow belly ready for its grim purpose, the next crucial step in Odysseus's audacious plan began. The selection of the warriors who would brave its confines. This was not a task for the faint-hearted, nor for those who sought glory in open battle. This mission demanded a different kind of courage, one rooted in patience, discipline, and an unwavering resolve to endure the unknown. Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief, and Odysseus, the architect of this deception, carefully weighed each candidate. They sought not just strength, but also cunning, the ability to remain utterly silent for hours, to control fear, and to act decisively when the moment finally arrived. The chosen few were the very cream of the Achaean army, men whose names were already whispered with reverence and awe across the camps. Among them, naturally, was Odysseus himself, whose intellect and foresight had conceived this entire scheme. He would lead them, not with a sword in hand, but with the steady beat of his own courage. There was also Menelaus, the Spartan king, whose honor had been so grievously wounded by Paris's abduction of Helen. His presence within the horse underscored the personal stakes of this war. Diomedes, the valiant king of Argos, known for his ferocity in battle and his unwavering loyalty, was another indispensable choice. These were men who had faced death countless times on the plains of Troy. Yet this challenge was unique. It was a battle fought in darkness, in silence, in the confined space of a wooden beast, rather than under the open sky. The process of selection was shrouded in absolute secrecy. No one outside the inner circle was to know the true purpose of the horse, or the identities of those who would be sealed within its wooden shell. Each warrior chosen was approached individually, often under the cloak of night, and presented with the perilous nature of the undertaking. They were told of the immense risk. If the plan failed, if the Trojans discovered their presence, their deaths would be swift and brutal. There would be no mercy, no chance for heroic last stands. Yet, for each man, the promise of finally breaking Troy's impregnable walls, of bringing an end to a decade of bloodshed and stalemate, outweighed the terrifying odds. The chance to achieve what open warfare had failed to deliver for 10 long years fueled their acceptance, a desperate hope for a decisive end to the long, grinding conflict. As the day approached when the horse would be presented to Troy, a palpable tension settled over the Achaean camp. The chosen warriors made their quiet preparations, saying their farewells not with grand gestures, but with solemn glances and unspoken promises. They stripped themselves of anything that might betray their presence within the horse. No clanking armor, no jingling ornaments. Their weapons were chosen for their silence and effectiveness in close quarters: daggers, short swords, and small, easily concealed spears. They would rely on stealth and surprise rather than the thunder of a full charge. The air inside the horse, they knew, would be close and stifling, filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood and the nervous sweat of heavily armed men. Each breath would be measured, each movement controlled, They would depend entirely on the skill of Epeius, the carpenter, who had constructed the horse with secret mechanisms for entry and exit, and on their own iron discipline. The wooden planks, carefully fitted, allowed for no accidental light, ensuring their concealment was absolute. The final moments before entering the horse were perhaps the most challenging. Each warrior, one by one, climbed the hidden ladder and slipped into the dark interior. The heavy planks sealed behind them, plunging them into a world of absolute blackness, broken only by the faintest slivers of light filtering through unseen cracks. They positioned themselves carefully, each man finding his designated spot among the timbers, pressing close to his comrades. The rhythmic creak of the wood was the only sound, a constant reminder of their wooden prison. The silence within was profound, broken only by the soft, controlled breathing of the men and the occasional rustle of their cloaks. They were a living, breathing core within a hollow shell, waiting for the world outside to make its move. They knew that their lives and the fate of the entire Achaean expedition now rested on the success of this audacious gamble, on the credulity of the Trojans, and on the cunning of the man who led them, Odysseus. This was not just a hiding place. It was a crucible where fear and hope were forged into an unyielding resolve. The weight of their mission, the culmination of 10 years of war, pressed down on them in the suffocating darkness, a shared burden that bound them together more tightly than any chain. They were the silent vanguard, the hidden blade poised to strike at the heart of Troy, should fate and deception allow it. The waiting began, an agonizing test of nerve and patience as the sounds of the Achaean camp slowly faded away, replaced by the distant murmur of the sea and the imagined presence of their unsuspecting enemies just beyond the wooden walls of their temporary tomb. Every muscle tensed, every sense heightened. They listened, ready for the slightest tremor that would signal either their triumph or their doom. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of history pressing in on them as they prepared for the moment when darkness would give way to light and silence to the roar of battle. Each warrior understood the profound significance of their chosen role, a desperate and final throw of the dice in a war that had consumed a generation. Their resolve was unwavering, their courage absolute, as they embraced the darkness, ready for whatever the gods and fate held in store. The great wooden horse now stood complete, an imposing, silent sentinel on the plains before Troy, its hollow belly holding the elite warriors, men whose courage was matched only by their unwavering discipline. Odysseus, their leader, had already shared the final perilous steps of their audacious plan, emphasizing the need for absolute conviction in their deception. The time had come for the Achaeans to make their grand deceptive exit, a maneuver designed to shatter Trojan resolve and open the city gates from within. Under the cloak of a moonless night, a profound and strategic silence descended upon the vast Greek encampment. Orders were given in hushed tones, their urgency masked by the deep darkness that enveloped the plains. The immense Achaean fleet, hundreds of ships that had for 10 long grinding years pressed against the shores of Troy, began to stir with an almost imperceptible motion. Masts creaked softly, a low rhythmic sound against the night, as sails unfurled like ghostly wings, catching the faintest, almost imperceptible breath of wind. One by one, Then in growing numbers, the ships slipped silently away from the familiar beach, their prows turning purposefully towards the open, dark sea. Every detail of this departure was a meticulously crafted element of their deception, a performance of abandonment designed to convince even the most skeptical Trojan that the siege was finally, irrevocably over. The destination for this feigned retreat was the nearby island of Tenedos, a small rocky outcrop located just a few miles off the Trojan coast. This island, a familiar landmark to both sides after a decade of relentless warfare, served as the perfect, inconspicuous hiding place. From its sheltered coves and rocky shores, the fleet could remain entirely out of sight of Troy's vigilant watchmen, yet be close enough to return with astonishing swiftness and overwhelming force when the crucial signal was finally given. The entire audacious plan hinged entirely on the Trojans believing, without a shadow of a doubt, that the weary Achaeans had at last given up hope, their spirits broken, and had sailed for home, leaving behind only the spoils of a seemingly failed campaign. As the last ship, a mere silhouette against the paling sky, faded into the pre-dawn mist, only two stark elements remained on the desolate beach: the colossal wooden horse, gleaming faintly, almost eerily, in the first light of dawn, and a single Achaean soldier, deliberately left behind. His name was Sinon, a man chosen not for his brute strength in battle, nor for his prowess with a spear, but for his extraordinarily cunning mind and his remarkably persuasive tongue. He was a master of words, a gifted orator capable of weaving intricate tales so utterly convincing they could bend the will of even the most astute and wary kings. His solitary role was by far the most dangerous and pivotal of all: to be discovered and captured by the unsuspecting Trojans, to endure their inevitable scrutiny and interrogation, and then, with every fiber of his being, to deliver the carefully constructed lie that would, they truly hoped, open the ancient impenetrable city gates from within. The sun began its slow ascent, casting long, stark shadows across the now utterly empty encampment. The familiar bustle and clamor of a massive, long-term besieged army were gone, replaced by an unsettling, almost unnatural quiet that hung heavy in the morning air. The once vibrant shore, which for years had been littered with countless tents, formidable siege engines, and the constant, restless movement of thousands of armed men, was now eerily barren, scoured clean by the departing force. Only the giant horse stood, a solitary, enigmatic monument to what appeared, on the surface, to be a failed, decade-long military campaign. This dramatic and absolute absence was meant to send an undeniable, powerful message to the Trojans. Their long, arduous endurance had finally paid off, their ancient city was at last safe, and the Greeks, defeated and disheartened, had departed for good. From atop the mighty God-built walls of Troy, the watchmen, who had for so many years been accustomed to the daily, monotonous sight of the Achaean ships and the relentless grinding sounds of their vast camp, must have stared down in profound disbelief. The ships were undeniably gone. The sprawling tents had vanished. The entire Greek army, which had been a constant, suffocating, and terrifying presence for an entire decade, had simply, mysteriously, vanished into the sea. A fragile wave of cautious elation, mixed with a lingering, almost instinctive suspicion, must have swept through the war-weary city. Could it truly be over? Had their unwavering resistance, their desperate prayers to the gods, finally driven the relentless invaders away from their beloved home? Yet the horse remained. Its sheer, overwhelming size, its unusual, almost alien form, and its sudden, inexplicable appearance on the deserted beach would undoubtedly spark intense curiosity and fervent debate among the Trojans. It was a deliberate anomaly, a carefully placed riddle left behind to capture their undivided attention and ignite their desperate imagination. The Achaeans had gambled absolutely everything on this audacious psychological maneuver. They had put their ultimate trust in the Trojans' profound desire for peace, their desperate eagerness to believe in a miraculous, sudden end to their decade of suffering, and their fundamental, often irresistible human curiosity. The elite warriors hidden within the horse, in the suffocating, oppressive darkness of its wooden belly, could do nothing but wait. They heard the subtle, rhythmic sounds of the receding waves, the faint, almost ghostly creak of the ship timbers, as the fleet sailed further and further away, carrying with it all their hopes of reinforcement. Their breath was held, their muscles tensed, as they committed themselves to the absolute, unwavering stillness required for their perilous deception. Every passing moment was an agonizing test of nerve, a silent, fervent prayer that Sinon, the lone, vulnerable man left outside, would succeed in his seemingly impossible, utterly crucial task. The fate of Troy, and indeed the ultimate fate of the entire Achaean expedition, now rested precariously on the power of a single, monumental lie and the absolute conviction of one isolated man. The stage was now irrevocably set for the final, catastrophic act of a war that had dragged on for 10 brutal, bloody years, a conclusion that would be achieved not by overwhelming strength of arms, but by the insidious, devastating power of cunning and the most profound deception. Now, you must envision the scene before Troy's towering gates, where the morning sun now cast long shadows over a mysteriously deserted battlefield. The Achaean fleet, which for 10 long, arduous years had been a constant, ominous presence on the horizon, had utterly vanished. Only a massive wooden horse, an unprecedented and utterly bewildering structure, stood silently on the plains, and nearby, bound and seemingly abandoned, lay a lone figure, Sinon, a Greek soldier chosen by Odysseus himself for his remarkable cunning intellect and his exceptionally persuasive tongue. His hands were tied behind his back, his face deliberately smeared with dirt, his expression a calculated mixture of fear and feigned despair, all meticulously crafted for maximum, truly heart-wrenching effect. The Trojans, cautiously emerging from their city, first felt a profound rush of disbelief, then a cautious surge of hope. Had the long, brutal siege truly ended? Had the Greeks finally given up? Their initial jubilation was quickly tempered by a deep, ingrained suspicion. This sudden, silent departure, leaving behind such an immense and peculiar object, seemed far too easy, too convenient, almost certainly a trick. They approached the colossal horse warily, examining its immense form, its smooth, unblemished wood. Soon they discovered Sinon. He lay there, seemingly utterly exhausted, a perfect picture of misery. A crowd quickly gathered around him, questions and accusations flying thick and fast. Who was he? Why was he left behind? What, precisely, was the meaning of this giant wooden effigy? Sinon, recognizing his opportune moment, began to weave his elaborate tale, His voice, though feigned to be weak and trembling, carried a compelling and undeniable conviction. He claimed to be a victim, a man deeply wronged by the Achaeans, especially by Odysseus, whom he painted as a cruel, vindictive, and thoroughly ruthless mastermind, the very architect of his profound suffering. He explained that the Greeks, desperate to return home after a decade of futile and destructive war, had consulted the oracle. The oracle, he asserted, had demanded a human sacrifice to ensure a safe passage back across the treacherous seas, just as they had once sacrificed Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon, to gain favorable winds for their initial ill-fated journey to Troy. Sinon declared with a dramatic flourish that he had been chosen as that very sacrificial offering. He recounted a harrowing escape, how he had broken free from his bonds just as the altars were prepared for his demise, and had fled desperately into the dark night, hiding until the fleet had finally departed. His story was crafted with exquisite emotional detail to evoke profound pity, to make him appear as a fellow sufferer, a man utterly discarded and fundamentally betrayed by his own people. This narrative, delivered with such convincing anguish and apparent sincerity, began to chip away at the Trojans' initial well-founded skepticism, softening their hardened hearts. Then Sinon skillfully turned his attention to the great wooden horse. He explained its true purpose with a carefully constructed lie designed to appeal directly to the Trojans' deep-seated piety and their fervent desire for divine favor. He claimed the horse was a sacred offering, a colossal gift to the mighty goddess Athena, intended specifically to atone for the grave sacrilege committed by Odysseus and Diomedes. He recounted how, early in the war, these two audacious Achaean heroes had audaciously stolen the Palladium, a sacred statue of Athena housed within Troy's holiest precincts. This statue, he patiently explained, was believed to be a powerful talisman, safeguarding the existence of the city. By stealing it, they had incurred Athena's profound and terrible wrath. The horse, Sinon asserted, was meticulously built to appease the angered goddess, a final, desperate attempt by the Greeks to win back her favor before their final, long-awaited departure. But there was a truly crucial detail, Sinon continued, lowering his voice as if imparting a great, dangerous, and whispered secret. The Achaeans had intentionally constructed the horse to be far too massive to fit through Troy's city gates. Their hope, he claimed with a knowing look, was that the Trojans, in their ignorance or stubborn defiance, would either destroy it or leave it standing scornfully outside their protective walls. If it were destroyed, Athena's unmitigated anger would fall directly and catastrophically upon Troy. If it remained outside, it would be perceived as a profound insult to the powerful goddess. The Greeks, he insisted, believed that by leaving it outside, they would ensure that Athena's favor would remain steadfastly with them, guaranteeing their safe and prosperous journey home, thus sealing Troy's inevitable doom. However, Sinon concluded, his voice rising with feigned hope and urgent conviction, if the Trojans were wise enough, if they were brave enough to bring this immense offering inside their city, it would miraculously reverse Athena's divine favor. The horse, he declared with dramatic flair, was not merely an offering. It was a potent counter-talisman, a new palladium, even more powerful and blessed than the original. If brought within the walls, it would become an impenetrable, divine protector, an unassailable shield for Troy, guaranteeing their ultimate victory and eternal safety, turning the tide of the war definitively and permanently in their favor. It would transform their city into an impregnable fortress, forever blessed by the very goddess the Greeks had sought so desperately to appease. This was precisely why the Greeks had made it so large, he reasoned, to prevent the Trojans from taking it inside and thus securing their own glorious destiny. They feared Troy's eventual glorious triumph if the horse were brought in. The Trojans listened intently, their hearts increasingly swayed by Sinon's eloquent, sincere words. His story, so detailed, so logically presented, and so emotionally charged, played perfectly into their deepest hopes and most desperate fears. The idea that this magnificent gift could miraculously turn the tide of a decade-long war, that it could bestow upon Troy the divine protection they so desperately craved, was almost utterly irresistible. They had suffered for so long, enduring endless battles, devastating losses, and constant deprivation. Now, a chance for an almost miraculous divine victory, delivered right to their doorstep, seemed to resent itself. The cunning of Odysseus, which Sinon had so artfully demonized, now ironically seemed to be a profound weakness that could be exploited by the Trojans themselves. The Trojans began to debate, their ingrained skepticism slowly eroding under the relentless weight of Sinon's carefully constructed narrative and their own profound yearning for an end to the protracted, bloody conflict. They looked at the colossal horse no longer as a potential threat, but as a tangible promise, a magnificent symbol of their impending triumph, a sacred gift from the very gods themselves, waiting to be welcomed into their city. The trap was set, not with overt force, but with carefully chosen words, woven by a master deceiver, designed to ensnare the minds and hopes of a weary, desperate people. But even as the Trojans, their hearts swelling with a profound hope they had not felt in years, began to contemplate bringing this colossal wooden offering into their city, a voice of caution, stark and unyielding, rose from their midst. It belonged to Laocoon, a venerable priest of Apollo, a man whose wisdom was as deep as his loyalty to Troy, a prophet whose insights had often guided his people through difficult times. He had watched the Greeks for a decade, observed their relentless attacks, their cunning strategies, and their unwavering determination, and he felt a chilling unease settle deeply in his heart as he looked upon the massive wooden horse. His mind, trained in interpreting omens and understanding the subtle currents of fate, told him with certainty that this was no mere gift. This was a trap, a deception designed to exploit their deepest desires for peace and triumph, a final, desperate gambit. The very notion of the Achaeans simply departing, leaving behind such a grand, inexplicable structure, filled him with a profound sense of foreboding. He rushed through the jubilant crowds, his aged robes billowing around him as he moved with urgent purpose, his voice hoarse with a desperate need to be heard, a plea to break through the collective euphoria. He called out to his fellow citizens, his countrymen, imploring them to listen, to pause their premature celebrations, and to not be swayed by the false promises of an enemy they had fought for so long and so bitterly. "Do not trust the horse, Trojans," he cried, his words echoing across the bustling plain, cutting through the rising celebratory din like a sharp, cold blade. Whatever it is, I fear the Greeks, even when they bring gifts. It was at this precise and critical juncture, as the brilliant Aegean sun began its slow, inevitable descent towards the western horizon, that the sea, usually a familiar and comforting presence, revealed a terrifying and unprecedented aspect. From the tranquil blue depths, two immense, horrifyingly sinuous forms began to emerge. They were serpents, colossal beyond any natural scale, their thick, segmented bodies glistening with the salty brine, their heads crowned with menacing crests, and their eyes burning with a malevolent light. Their forms, thick as oak trunks, coiled and uncoiled with terrifying power, propelling them swiftly toward the shore. A deep, collective gasp, followed by a profound hush, fell over the assembled Trojans as they watched, transfixed and paralyzed. The serpents did not pause. With relentless speed, they slithered across the beach, their destination horrifyingly clear. Laocoon, accompanied by his two young sons, stood near an altar, preparing a sacrifice to Poseidon. The serpents struck with terrifying swiftness. They first seized the two boys, their powerful bodies coiling around their fragile forms, crushing the life from them. Laocoon, his face contorted with horror, rushed forward to save his sons. He fought with the primal desperation of a father, but his strength was no match for the divine wrath embodied in the serpents. They wrapped their enormous coils around his body, their venomous fangs sinking deep into his flesh. He fell, engulfed, and silenced forever. The scene was one of unparalleled horror, witnessed by the stunned and terrified Trojan populace. The sight of their revered priest and his innocent children brutally extinguished by these unearthly creatures struck terror deep into their souls. This was not a random act. It was a clear, unambiguous sign from the gods. Laocoon had dared to question the sacred, to raise a weapon against what was presented as an offering to Athena. He had spoken ill of the horse, and now the heavens themselves had delivered their terrible judgment. The Trojans were now utterly convinced that Laocoon's death was a direct punishment for his impiety. His warnings now seemed to be the very cause of his and his sons' destruction. The path forward was now chillingly clear. The last vestige of doubt had been brutally extinguished. The Trojans, now eager to appease the angered gods and firmly believing that the horse was their only path to safety, would take the final, irreversible step. They decided to dismantle a part of their own walls, the very walls that had withstood a 10-year siege. With shouts and triumph, they set to work, widening the breach. Finally, the opening was large enough. To the jubilant cries of the crowd, they began to haul the horse into the city. Hundreds of men pulled thick ropes, pushing the wooden giant inch by inch through the ruined wall and onto the central square. Once the horse was inside, a true festival erupted. The Trojans, confident in their victory, lit torches, held feasts in the streets, and sang and danced. Wine flowed like a river, and laughter echoed through the night. They felt safer than ever before. No one could have imagined that inside this majestic symbol of their victory lay a mortal threat, that every cup of wine drunk, every song sung, was bringing them closer to an end that would come before dawn. Night fell upon Troy, and in the pitch-black darkness inside the horse, the warriors waited. They waited for the sounds of the festival to die down. They waited for the city to fall asleep. They waited for their moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the plains, the sounds of fervent celebration within Troy slowly began to fade. The Trojans, exhausted by a day of boundless revelry and profoundly convinced of their newfound divine protection, drifted into a deep, unsuspecting sleep. The colossal wooden horse, now a towering symbol of their triumph, stood silently in the city square, an imposing monument to a victory that was, in truth, their ultimate undoing. The evening air grew still, heavy with the quiet of a city at rest, broken only by the distant rhythmic murmur of the Aegean Sea and the occasional mournful call of a night bird from the surrounding hills. Within the cramped, hollow belly of the horse, the chosen Achaean warriors, tense and resolute, held their breath. They had endured hours of stifling confinement, listening to the very people they intended to destroy celebrate their own impending doom. The deepening darkness outside was their long-awaited signal, the profound silence of the sleeping city, their final, urgent cue. Odysseus, known throughout the Achaean host for his unparalleled cunning and decisive leadership, moved first. He was the ingenious mastermind of this audacious plan, and now, in this pivotal moment of truth, his resolve was absolute and unwavering. With silent, practiced movements, a hidden latch was released, and a small, ingeniously concealed door within the horse's flank swung open. The first cool, star-strewn glimpse of the night sky was a welcome relief from the stifling darkness within. One by one, the elite warriors descended, their feet landing softly on the cobblestones of Troy. They were the very best of the Achaean army. The valiant Menelaus, the mighty Diomedes, the resourceful Odysseus himself, and many others, their bronze weapons drawn, their faces grimly set in anticipation. Neoptolemus, the young, fierce son of the legendary Achilles, was also among them, eager to prove his lineage and exact his own measure of vengeance in the final, brutal act of this protracted war. Their first, most critical objective was clear: to open the great Scaean gates, the very entrance through which the colossal wooden horse had been pulled with such triumphant fanfare just hours earlier. Under the deep cover of night, they moved swiftly and silently through the deserted streets, their steps barely audible. The proud city, so vibrant and boisterous just hours before with the shouts of celebration, was now a silent tomb of unsuspecting sleep, its inhabitants utterly unaware of the terror about to descend upon them. Reaching the massive gates, they swiftly overpowered the few drowsy guards, silent and efficient in their grim task. The heavy bolts were drawn back with a grating sound, and the massive timbers groaned as the gates slowly, laboriously swung inward. This was the precise signal for the waiting fleet. Far out at sea, the Achaean ships, which had merely retreated beyond the horizon to successfully deceive the Trojans, now turned their prows back towards the shore. Guided by the flickering torchlight from the newly opened gates, they sailed back, their oars cutting through the dark water with renewed and desperate urgency. The wind, which had held them captive for so long at Aulis years ago, now seemed to favor their grim purpose, swelling their sails and pushing them inexorably towards their destiny. As the first ships beached on the familiar sands outside the city, their decks swarmed with thousands of eager, vengeful Achaean soldiers. They poured into the city through the now open gates, a silent, deadly torrent of steel and fury. The Trojans, abruptly awakened by the rising clamor, stumbled from their beds into an unimaginable nightmare. Utter confusion reigned supreme. They had firmly believed the war was over, that their city was safe, divinely protected by Athena. Now, armed warriors were everywhere, their polished bronze armor glinting ominously in the pale moonlight, their terrifying war cries echoing relentlessly through the narrow streets. The air quickly filled with the deafening clash of steel, the piercing screams of the dying, and the ominous crackle of flames as the Achaeans, fueled by a decade of agonizing frustration and profound loss, mercilessly set fire to the houses, starting with the outer districts. The once proud city of Troy, which had defied them for so long, was now a scene of utter, horrific devastation. King Priam, the venerable aged ruler of Troy, old and frail, donned his armor one last time, a desperate, futile attempt to defend his beloved people. He was brutally slain at the altar of Zeus, a sacred place, by the relentless Neoptolemus, a ruthless act that marked the tragic end of a long and noble reign. Cassandra, the ill-fated prophetess, cursed to see the future but never be believed by her own people, had warned them repeatedly of this very moment, but her words had fallen on deaf ears, dismissed as madness. She was tragically dragged from Athena's temple, her desperate pleas ignored, her terrible fate tragically sealed. Houses burned, ancient temples were systematically desecrated, and the proud, towering walls, which had stood for 10 arduous years against the mighty force of the Achaean army, offered no protection against the enemy now firmly entrenched within. The once impregnable city, supposedly built with the direct help of gods, became a roaring pyre. The final battle was short, brutal, and utterly decisive. By dawn, the grand city of Troy, once a symbol of resilience and defiance, was reduced to smoking ruins, its people scattered, enslaved, or dead. The war, which had begun with a golden apple and a stolen queen, ended with fire, blood, and the silent colossal wooden horse standing amidst the ashes, a grim, stark testament to the devastating power of cunning deception and the tragic, irreversible fall of a great civilization. The Achaeans had finally achieved their long-sought victory, but the immense cost for both sides was immeasurable, leaving a legacy of sorrow that would echo profoundly through the ages.